In 1917, the United States had an active economy boosted by World War I. Many would-be workers were drafted or enlisted into military service, creating a shortage of labor for industrial employers in major cities, which had long been destinations for European immigrants. Concurrently, African Americans began the Great Migration from the rural southern United States to seek better work and education in the North, as well as to escape from lynchings and the discriminations of the Jim Crow era. Labor agencies recruited some workers for specific jobs, especially as strikebreakers, but labor demand was sufficient that migrants moved on their own, having heard about the new employment opportunities created by the wartime economy. 3. The neighboring communities of St. Louis, Missouri, and East St. Louis, Illinois, both became destinations for Southern migrants. Blacks were arriving in St. Louis at the rate of 2,000 per week during the spring of 1917. 4. Major industries in East St. Louis included Aluminum or Co., American Steel Foundry, Republic Iron and Steel, O'Bear Nestor Glass and Elliott Frog and Switch. A frog was part of a railroad switch, with many facilities located just outside the city limits to escape paying taxes. Nearby National City had stockyards and meat packing plants, attracting more workers. It was a rough industrial city where saloons outnumbered schools and churches. 3. Non-whites were initially a small minority. In 1910, approximately 6,000 African Americans lived in East St. Louis, out of a total population of 58,000. By 1917, the black population had increased to 10,000, or 1/6 of the total population of 60,000. Citation needed. The period was one of frequent labor violence in industrial cities across the United States. Employers used force to try to suppress organized labor and strikes, while workers struggled to gain fair wages and working conditions. Many workers were immigrants from Europe. When industries became embroiled in labor strikes, the traditionally white unions often sought to strengthen their bargaining positions by hindering or excluding black workers. Conversely, industry owners hired blacks as replacements or strikebreakers, deepening existing segregation and interracial hostility. 5. Ethnicities competed economically to survive. White workers often resented black newcomers due to competition for jobs and housing and fear they would be undercut by black workers who were willing to accept lower wages. In East St. Louis, local politicians, company foremen, and labor union officials fanned the resentment. The approval of the local police and National Guard were later considered important in helping to escalate the rioting. 6-3. The Springfield Race Riot of 1908 in nearby Springfield, Illinois, was an expression of the simmering tensions in the region during the nadir of race relations. While in New Orleans on a lecture tour, Jamaican black nationalist Marcus Garvey, who founded the UNIA in 1916, became aware that Louisiana planters and the city's Board of Trade were worried about losing their labor force, as he recounted in a speech the following year. He said that Mayor Mulman of East St. Louis was also visiting the city that week, and city leaders asked for his assistance to help discourage black migration to the north. In the summer of 1916, 2,500 white employees of the meatpacking industry near East St. Louis went on strike for higher wages, and the companies imported black workers to replace them. Ultimately, the workers won a wage increase, but the companies retained nearly 800 blacks, firing as many whites after the strike, according to the former president of the Central Trades and Labor Union of East St. Louis. This result only exacerbated the growing racial tension. In the spring of 1917, the mostly white workers of the aluminum ore company in East St. Louis voted to strike. The company recruited hundreds of black workers to replace them. 7. Tensions between the groups escalated. At a labor meeting held in City Hall on May 28 and made up mostly of white workers, rumors circulated of black men fraternizing with white women. 8-9. Violence at it. Following the May 28 meeting, some 1,000 to 3,000 white men marched into downtown East St. Louis and began attacking African Americans on the street and in streetcars and burning some buildings. Illinois Governor Frank Warren Bowden called in the National Guard to suppress the violence. Although rumors circulated that blacks were planning retaliatory attacks. 8. Conditions eased somewhat for a few weeks. Citation needed. Following the May disorder, the East St. Louis Central Labor Council requested an investigation by the State Council of Defense. Its report said that Southern Negroes were misled by false advertisements and unscrupulous employment agents to come to East St. Louis in such numbers under false pretenses of secure jobs and decent living quarters. 10. The tensions between black workers and white workers quickly formed again as no solutions to their economic challenges were agreed upon. Citation needed. The massacre was precipitated by fatal errors. On July 1, a black Ford Model T11, occupied by white males, drove through a black area of the city. Passengers fired several shots into a group on the street. An hour later, a Ford containing 4 people, including a journalist and 2 police officers, Detective Sergeant Samuel Coppage and Detective Frank Wadley, passed through the same area. Black residents, possibly assuming this car held the original attackers, opened fire on the car, killing one officer instantly and mortally wounding another. The next day, thousands of white spectators gathered to view the detectives' blood-stained automobile. From there they rushed into the black sections of town, south and west of the city, and began rioting. The mob beat and shot blacks on the street indiscriminately, including women and children. After cutting the water hoses of the fire department, white rioters burned entire sections of the city and shot black residents as they escaped the flames. 8. Claiming that Southern Negroes deserved a genuine lynching, some whites hanged several blacks. The following day, on July 3, 1917, a reporter from Post-Dispatch of St. Louis wrote, "For an hour and a half last evening I saw the massacre of helpless Negroes at Broadway and 4th Street, in downtown East St. Louis, where blacks' skin was death warrant. All the impartial witnesses agree that the police were either indifferent or encouraged the barbarities, and that the major part of the National Guard was indifferent or inactive. No organized effort was made to protect the Negroes or disperse the murdering groups. The lack of frenzy and of a large and infuriated mob made the task easy. 10 determined officers could have prevented most of the outrages. 100 men acting with authority and vigor might have prevented any outrage. Hundreds of blacks fled across the Eads Bridge over the Mississippi River to St. Louis to escape the violence, while 1,500 sought refuge in city buildings. 17. St. Louis institutions worked to assist the refugees, including the St. Louis chapter of the Red Cross, the Provident Association, and the Jewish Education and Charitable Association, as well as related charities. The Red Cross Emergency Committee met daily with acting Mayor Allo, members of his administration, and representatives of the charities to discuss how to aid the refugees. 3. Governor Bowden ordered in the Illinois National Guard, who arrived on July 3rd. Numerous witnesses said that the Guard initially joined in the attacks on blacks rather than stopping the riot. page needed more whites joined in. The New York Times reported that 10 or 15 young girls about 18 years old chased a Negro woman at the relay depot at about 5 o'clock. The girls were brandishing clubs and calling upon the men to kill the woman. Few photographs exist of the events, as rioters attacked photographers and destroyed their cameras, and city police harassed journalists. After the massacre, the St. Louis Argus said, "The entire country has been aroused to a sense of shame and pity by the magnitude of the national disgrace enacted by the bloodthirsty rioters in East St. Louis Monday, July 2nd. Carlos F. heard of the Post-Dispatch staff, who was an eyewitness of atrocities of the East Side, told a plain circumstantial story of the outrages he witnessed. The assaults and murders were cold-blooded, deliberate and incredibly brutal. They were not the work of a mob infuriated against particular offenders. They were the work of groups of men and women who sought out and burned out the Negroes and then shot, beat, kicked or hanged them. The work was done in a spirit of flippant, relentless barbarism." U.S. District Attorney Charles Clark calls for a federal grand jury inquiry and criticizes the Chamber of Commerce, saying its response is off target. Too many of the members of the committee are men who are directly interested in getting Negro laborers back to work, the district attorney asserted. These men seem to have forgotten that a bloodthirsty mob of more than 1,000 men killed and burned less than a week ago because they were convinced that large employers of labor intended to give permanent preference to Negroes over whites. Those men have not left the city and they have not repented of their excesses. They are just as bitter as they were, and the action of the Chamber of Commerce is forcing these Negroes down their throats is only inflaming the men who participated in the riots. After the massacre, varying estimates of the death toll circulated. The police chief estimated that 100 African Americans had been killed. The renowned journalist Ida B. Wells reported in the Chicago Defender that 40 to 150 African American people were killed during the July massacre. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, estimated deaths at 100 to 200. Some 6,000 African Americans were left homeless after their neighborhoods were burned. A congressional investigating committee, which met in the fall of that year, concluded that no precise death toll could be determined, but reported that at least 8 whites and 39 African Americans died, while the local coroner had documented 9 white deaths. The deaths of African American victims were less clearly recorded. Activists who disputed the committee's conclusions about deaths argued that the true number of deaths would never be known because many black corpses were not recovered or did not pass through the hands of undertakers, who reported to the coroner. 4 white men and 6 blacks are reported to be charged with murder. This information was obtained from a member of the coroner's jury by a Post-Dispatch reporter. The juror complained that most of the police efforts had been directed in the investigation toward incriminating Negroes who participated in the riots, rather than the whites who, in addition to taking Negro lives, destroyed about $300,000 worth of property by burning it.